Welcome to the Growth, Grace, and Prosperity Podcast. Join Stewart Heath for down-to-earth conversations with top professionals, entrepreneurs, and leaders who have a story to tell. Let's get rolling.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another edition of the Growth, Grace, and Prosperity Podcast. I'm your host, Stewart Heath, founder and CEO of Harvard Grace Capital. We are very honored to have Kellee Johnson with us here today. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct.
Hey.
She is a world traveler. I'm sorry, you were saying?
Kellee.
Kellee, forgive me.
That's fine.
And I'm an amateur, unprofessional host. So anyway, Kellee Johnson. I was so fascinated by what we were talking about before the recording started, and Kellee's visited 48 countries and does a lot of things that I would like to do, such as sailing. So I'm interested to get her entrepreneurial story here today. So Kellee, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Kellee, over the course of your career, is there an event that you might consider to be a game changer that puts you on the path to where you are now versus where perhaps you thought you were going to go when you were younger?
There's a lot. I would say a good handful. I mean, it started with mentors. I had some really good mentors right out, in college as well as out of college. And then becoming an entrepreneur. I never thought I would become an entrepreneur. I thought I'd be a corporate person, right? And from there, you learn to build teams. You get your first six-figure client. You find time to allocate because it does consume your life as an entrepreneur. So you've got a balance between rainmaking and managing your team and executing and measuring over. It's a cycle that just keeps going over and over. So I've had some really good mentors. My first boss at Tropicana, which was a Fortune 500 juice company, she taught me a couple things, a financial lesson, which is, hey, contribute to that 401k, we match it, and compounding works really well. She also would stand up when she talked to journalists. We're in the news business. When they're on deadline, they want your story, but her tactic was to stand on her feet so you could stay on your toes, and nothing is ever off the record. So little things like that she taught me, and she also gave me my eternal learning mindset. She said, hey, if you ever want to get your master's degree, we'll pay for your graduate school. And it was just a really amazing opportunity. And I never forgot her. Ironically, we both ended up getting breast cancer in our life, but unfortunately it got her. So I'm still here, but we had a lot in common, and I'm eternally grateful for her. There's a lot of other examples I could give you, I think, now that I think about it a little bit more.
Well, what was the impetus for you to leave corporate life and start your own firm?
Yeah, I orange juice is great. I drank it every day on the campus where we worked. The enamel gets taken off your teeth. And I started joking, like, orange juice isn't saving the world. I think I want something bigger, something that might be into healthcare or saving lives. And ironically, I ended up joining a startup and learned a ton. And I did miss the corporate world at first, but then I realized this is my home. This is where I need to be. I need to be working with entrepreneurs and eventually become one, which was great. And I had speaking of mentors, I had one when I left. I learned to sail in my 20s, late 20s. I played volleyball in college, never thought I'd get on a boat, but I loved the water. And in Sarasota, Florida, where I was working for Tropicana, the water's everywhere. And so I met a father and son at the Red Cross, and turns out he had his NSA clearances still. He was in intelligence. And but in Sarasota, there's a lot of former retired intelligence folks who never give up their clearances. And he said to me one day, believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. So what does that tell us? If I say it again, believe half of what you see, you're watching it happen, and none of what you hear. So it tells us to always verify things, go to the horse's mouth for facts and attempt to verify things. Because I think today, in the divided country and with AI generated content and social media filters, you never know what's real. And so I think back to the mentorship of importance in my career, that was a phrase I'll never forget. It was decades ago, and I still say it at least once a month.
That's great. That's great. everybody hits bumps in the roads along the way. Sometimes it might be health. You've already alluded to one. I think we're interested in whatever you would like to share with us, but sometimes a business bump, sometimes you lose a job or whatever. There bumps come in many forms, and the older you get, the more bumps you hit in the road. Can you tell us how you a bump that you've hit in your career and how you navigated it?
Yes, bumps make us who we are today. We don't feel like it when it happens to us, but I would say a bump I hit was when I transitioned from corporate to startups. I was in startups for 8 years, and then I took a year off and I got recruited by a big company in Chicago. And I remember thinking, well, I've got to move across the country. I'm going to be getting back in corporate. Am I really ready for that? I thought I was, and I wasn't. I thought I like working with big companies, but not working for them or with them as consulting. So I will share my worst boss story. I think we all have at least one in our careers, but it kept me up for about 6 months. And it was the reason I started my business, which has been almost 20 years now. It was a gift, and it was the catalyst for starting what I didn't know I could start. So it kind of pushed me to become an entrepreneur. I think this experience taught me to travel outside my comfort zone and to stay confident. Like, you know who you are, you know what you would like out of life. You remind yourself of your purpose. For me, it distilled down to leadership. Like, what is a good leader? Am I a leader? Because certain bosses can teach us that. And is a boss a leader? Sometimes a boss is a leader, but nothing's perfect. And so how we handle what happens to us says a lot. So here I thought I would be with another big company for several years. And I realized 6 to 12 months in, I needed another plan. So after I left, I took action. I didn't gossip. I tapped into my network. And so you should never underestimate your network, because if you build it strategically over the years, and not just when you want something, but it's a give and get back and forth, every year as you build out your network, determine who has your back and who can give you candid feedback, not just what you want to hear. So it was eye-opening for me. And, but knowing my purpose and that I wanted to help people, especially entrepreneurs that are founders and starting new things and always constantly innovating, it allowed me to stay true to what I knew was right. And then, as I mentioned, here I am 20 years later. So was it really a bad experience? I don't know. I don't think so anymore.
That's similar to what we hear a lot of entrepreneurs, bad boss, lose their job, just turning a bad situation into something that's been long-term good for them. Being the boss, you've got to stay current on things. You need to be usually ahead of things, perhaps more than your employees. How do you stay current? How do you stay on top of your industry and in your and what sources do you get your information from?
Those are great questions. I read a lot because I'm in the news business. And so there's business publications like the Wall Street Journal, books. I love reading books. In fact, this topic personally resonates with me because I'm writing a book on innovation and creating the life that you want. And I think it started a long time ago where I always would put myself one step ahead of where I knew I was. And it was bold. And I was too naive to know at the time that I could have gotten myself into a lot of trouble. But I also started looking at problems as opportunities, because in the beginning I was very conflict avoidant and I wasn't really sure how to tackle certain things. So I would just not address them. And that wasn't going to work long term. So I was realistic about where I knew I wanted to be, but even if I wasn't there yet, I would still put myself in positions to volunteer or to just tackle something. I think technology and AI has allowed us to dabble into sort of this co-intelligence world. As far as partners in crime, to do research, I'm an eternal learner. I think I made a promise to myself in my late 20s to do something that I kind of have called recession-proof my life. And so at 26, I left the Fortune 500. I mentioned to you after 5 years at Tropicana. It was $1 billion company. I would leave voicemails for people and they wouldn't call me back, because really Tropicana was what they were here. It was very eye-opening. I'm like, I have to work a little harder. Then I joined a startup. walking to lunch the first day with the CFO, who was former big company as well, PepsiCo. And he said, we don't get paid until the first revenue check comes in. I go, what do you mean? There's no payroll. There's no direct deposit. And it was quite eye-opening. And then, I worked through that startup. It was fun. It was like getting an MBA real time without going to school. And I went through the dot-com bust of 2001, and then the crash of 2008 and 9 with Lehman Brothers. And then we all have gone through the 3 years of COVID. So my secret is committing to learning something new each decade, because it keeps life exciting. Besides the reading and networking and things, it's a way to recession-proof your life. And to learn something new each decade, I took it on as something pretty big, because a lot of life hobbies and passions can teach us things in the business world too, like sailing. Sailing is such a great metaphor for life. I took up martial arts, Aikido, for 3 years before the dojo closed during COVID. And then I love learning, and I like teaching. And I didn't know it until I was asked to adjunct at DePaul University in my field. And I ended up doing that for 6 years. And then work came, got really busy, and I started mentoring and guest lecturing instead. And I had a goal of sitting on a non-for-profit board and a for-profit board, and that's happened. And you mentioned travel. I think travel opens our eyes to many different cultures and different ways of doing things. I bought some real estate. I became a landlord, and the hardest thing for me to learn, I think, and it still is today, is learning how to relax. Walking the dog, exercise to me is relaxing, but most people would think that's insane. I float for an hour, usually in 1,000 pounds of salt and 10 inches of water. And that's thinking time. There's no technology in the water with you, and you can deep breathe and fall asleep. It's kind of shifted my entire nervous system and refocused what I really like to do. And so I don't feel stressed out in certain times when I used to. There's a term called eustress, EUSTRESS, which I'm like, oh, that's what I've been doing my whole life, and I just never knew it. It's where you put things in your life that might seem overwhelming to a lot of people, but because it's your purpose and your passion, it just doesn't seem overwhelming at all.
Great. All right, let's pivot a little bit over to personal finance. And we're not asking for any numbers or dollar amounts or anything. We like to ask our entrepreneurs how they invest their personal investable dollars. What are your favorite asset classes?
Yeah.
Do you think Beanie Babies are coming back, and so you're stockpile those in the closet? Are you a sailboat broker, perhaps, on the side? So, what do y'all do with your investable dollars?
I wish I wasn't a sailboat broker, but I'm not. For me, it's been real estate. It's been investing in startups I believe in. Mobility is the number one disability in America. I invested in a Minnesota company, and serendipitously, there was a couple friends I knew at Stryker that I asked to sit in on the investor presentation with me, and they all 5 invested. So we're an investor group with a board seat now. And that's exciting to me, because it's what I do every day anyway. And when I find something I really believe in, and America's aging so fast that mobility is already a really big issue, one of the number one disabilities in the country. So aligning my passions with investment. So, and I love advising startups. And sometimes that is monetarily contributing too. So I plan to continue doing both in Tennessee, in Florida, hopefully Chicago. Those are 3 cities that are near and dear to me today. And yeah, and I would say from an investment, I mean, your IRA, I've been an entrepreneur for a long time, so the 401k didn't last long after Tropicana. And I have an advisor at Vanguard, actually. I love Vanguard. And that's been about 5 years now, and it's working really well.
Good. All right, last question. Kellee, if you had a mentee, if you're mentoring somebody, or if somebody just wants to follow in your footsteps, what one piece of advice would you give them?
Besides the golden rule, doing unto others as you would have done to you, I would say that the year I started my company, Steve Jobs gave the commencement speech at Stanford, and it was titled "Stay Hungry, Stay Foolish." And those words just hit me because as an entrepreneur, you always have to stay hungry, right? You're either starting your next one or you're going to get funding. Or in my case, it's always a constant pipeline of clients. So you got to stay hungry. And part of that is being resilient and having courage and guts and not losing that. And also to be motivated as if your life depended on it. So you have to be hungry to find every dollar you want to raise or you want to make. And then staying foolish, we're all going to make mistakes, make them all the time. And so you have to expect that and not be afraid to be bold and make moves that might be the dumb moves, but you look foolish, but at the same time you tried. And I think at Tropicana, going back to my first job out of college, and it was an engineering mistake in packaging, but the caps were popping off a shelf. And we as the corporate communications team were trying to say they're not exploding. You would never use the word explode because it's considered injury. It would scare people away from the product. But the CEO came down from New York to Bradenton, Florida, and spoke to thousands of employees and said, "Look, I don't care don't be afraid to make mistakes because that means you're stretching yourself, but do not let those mistakes happen again." And I was 23 years old, and that made quite an impression on my life. Like, it's okay to make mistakes. That means you're trying. Just don't let them happen again. That's the advice I would give.
Yeah, I like that. Kellee, thank you so much for your time today. If any one of our viewers wants to get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. They can email me at kjohnson@ballastgroup.com. That's my company, BALLASTGROUP.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn at Kellee, KELLEE Johnson.
Great. We'll make sure those links are in the show notes, make it easier for folks, and maybe they'll reach out. Again, anybody with the big C title doesn't have any time, and we appreciate you sharing some of yours with us. And thank you for thank you for being here and sharing your story. And thank you to the audience for watching this episode of the Growth, Grace, and Prosperity podcast. Please come back and watch another episode. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Growth, Grace, and Prosperity podcast. If you'd like to be a guest, visit growthgraceprosperity.com/guest. We'd love to hear your story.